Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I won't be able to speak as off the cuff as the other presenters because they've had plenty of practice with their subjects, but for me, I was given the subject, and it took a while to put it all together because I'm dealing with the vaping industry in South Africa, literally from inception to where we are today. I would love to deal with some of the subjects and some of the issues that they discuss because I'm very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about the industry as a harm reduction industry and what we achieve. Anyway, so before I start, I had some slides, but they're not up. But I put up a crystal ball. And the reason I put up a crystal ball was when I was given this topic and they said, what is the future of vaping in South Africa? I said that would be like looking into a crystal ball because the regulations, the legislation, the taxation, the way the industry is growing is so dynamic that it's almost impossible to forecast where we're going to be 6 months from now, a year from now, and definitely not 2 years from now. Okay, I am the founder of Vaperite, and we are South Africa's largest vape retailer and the largest vape retail chain by number of stores on the African continent. In addition to retail, we are also a manufacturer and we're a wholesaler. And then, as you know, I'm also a director and board member of the Vapor Products Association of South Africa. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in Port Elizabeth. My grandfather was very liberal. He was an ANC beneficiary. He had a very unique feature in his house in Cape Road, Port Elizabeth. He has a trapdoor in his lounge, and they used to have meetings where they used to come down the side of his house and climb up through the trapdoor into his lounge to have meetings, and that trapdoor actually still exists today. As such, my parents wanted me out of South Africa. They wanted me and my brothers out of South Africa because of the apartheid system. So in 1986, they sent me and my middle brother to America. My father had a green card because his mother had moved there in the 1970s. And then my parents and my youngest brother followed 2 years later. While I was in the USA, I pursued a career as a pilot, and that included being a helicopter pilot in the US Army. In 1995, after the ANC came into power, I returned to South Africa. I then spent 2 years flying for the Red Cross and the United Nations in mostly war-zone countries such as Angola and Afghanistan. In 1995, I was hired by South African Airways and spent 23 years with the airline, and I've flown literally every aircraft type they operate. I then opted for a retrenchment package in 2020 when the airline was exiting business rescue. So you might ask, how does an airline pilot get into the vaping industry and why? As much as I was and still am a bit of a health fanatic, eating mostly healthy food and barely touching alcohol, I had one vice, which I knew wasn't healthy, which I knew would probably kill me, and which I desperately wanted to quit, and that was smoking combustible cigarettes. In 2013, I discovered a product called the Clearo being sold by Twisp, and I think everyone here has heard of Twisp. I was immediately able to stop smoking cigarettes, and within a few weeks, my raspy breathing had cleared up, and I felt fantastic. After around a year of vaping and astounded at my ability to have no desire to return to smoking cigarettes, as well as feeling healthier than ever, I believed that vaping was not only a great business opportunity, but something every smoker should have access to in order to help them to quit combustible tobacco. I attended an international vape show in Frankfurt, Germany, made the necessary contacts with suppliers, and Vaperite was born. We'll now talk about the actual industry, not the South African industry, but just the beginning of vaping. Although tobacco and other companies have been dabbling since the mid-1960s with alternatives for delivering nicotine in a way that didn't involve combustion, the first commercially viable electronic cigarette was only patented in 2003. And interestingly enough, it was invented by a Hong Kong, I don't know if he was a scientist, but he was something along that line, whose father had died of cancer, and he had died from smoking cigarettes. And he decided that he needed to find a safer way of delivering nicotine. The first electronic cigarettes were crude devices, and some even resembled an actual cigarette, and they were called cigalikes. 10 years later, roughly around the time I discovered vaping, the industry was still in its infancy and products were still relatively crude. From 2014 onwards, the industry exploded. Chinese hardware manufacturers started to deliver more sophisticated products, and the USA led the industry as far as e-liquid was concerned. As the industry developed and competition for market share intensified, mainly USA e-liquid companies started to market the industry towards younger people. There were events like cloud blowing competitions and trick competitions. Some companies had full-time tricksters on staff who would attend international vape events, and they even earned somewhat of a celebrity status. This led many people to believe that vaping was a fad. And I don't know how many times when I started my company, people said this is a fad, it's not an industry, it's not going to last long. And everyone thought that when people got over this fad, they'd all go back to smoking cigarettes. However, at the same time that everyone believed that the market for vaping was mainly for those under the age of 30, millions of smokers who were looking for a healthier, safer, and more socially acceptable way to ingest nicotine started to switch to vaping. It makes sense that almost all of those over the age of 30 and possibly even over the age of 20 who started vaping were former smokers. Because the majority of people who start smoking don't start in their 20s, they don't start in their 30s. They don't even start at 19 or 20 or 18. They start when they're in their teens. They start when they're 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age. That's when most people first start experimenting with combustible tobacco. I believe it was at this juncture where former smokers started to use vape as a means of getting off combustible tobacco, that vaping moved from being a perceived fad to a major industry. In 2011, there were roughly 7 million people using electronic cigarettes globally. By 2020, this had increased to over 68 million. And as Dr. Clarke said, it's now well over that number. However, at the same time, in 2020, there were still 1.1 billion people smoking cigarettes. And sorry, that's the number that Dr. Clarke quoted. He said 1.3 billion. That shows that the number of people using combustible tobacco is increasing. We'll now turn to the South African vape industry, its infancy to the present. The company that initially brought vaping to South Africa was Twisp. The company was founded in 2008. They were visionaries and market disruptors, always one step ahead of the industry in the beginning. In fact, many people thought Twisp was a term for vaping and not the name of a company. There were times when we first started our company, people would walk into the store and say, Twisp. No, you actually vape. No, Twisp. No, Twisp is a company. Besides getting into the retail sector, and by that I mean kiosks, they were also the first to start supplying the FMCG market and literally had a stranglehold on the supermarket and petrol station chains. The initial vape shops were operated out of houses and slowly started to move to commercial retail locations from around 2015. Twisp had introduced kiosks in many of the major malls. E-liquid flavors were initially very basic, with many only having one flavor concentrate, such as a specific fruit or a specific sweet flavor, like an apple or a caramel, as examples. Then international flavor influence created blended e-liquid, where more complex combinations started to appear, and the first South African e-liquid manufacturing companies were established. However, even at this stage, many were operating from their homes and mixing in garages. Additionally, nicotine strengths were very low, mainly because the vaporizer systems being used at the time were suited to lower nicotine strengths as they delivered higher volumes of vapor. It was around 2015 that the industry really took off and vape shops and kiosks started to pop up in malls and shopping centers around the country. The rate of hardware innovation by mostly Chinese manufacturers was unprecedented, and the variety and quality of both hardware and e-liquid were constantly improving. It was also around this time that nicotine salt e-liquid started to appear and could only be used in low power and smaller devices. It was, in fact, Juul from the USA, and if you know anything about the industry, you'll know who Juul is. They developed the salt nicotine e-liquid through a company, PAX, which was a subsidiary of theirs, the manufacturer. It is manufactured in very high nicotine strengths and is absorbed into the body almost immediately, and therefore gives a similar nicotine fix, as cigarettes would, compared to the standard e-liquid that we used to sell, which is baseline nicotine e-liquid. The growth of the local vape industry literally exploded from this point onwards. Major wholesalers were established to supply local vape shops. Some retail vape shops became multi-store brands like ours, and individual shops were opening up all over the country. The barrier to entry for opening a vape shop is very low. You find a location, you brand it, you fit it out with shop fitting, you contact a wholesaler and a few Chinese wholesalers and manufacturers, and you just place your orders and boom, you got a vape shop. That's how easy it is. Then big tobacco entered the scene in South Africa in 2019, when British American Tobacco purchased Twisp. The essential reason for buying Twisp was the massive penetration Twisp had in the FMCG market and their hugely valuable brand name and recognition, as well as their large number of kiosks nationwide. It was also around the same time that the Vapour Products Association of South Africa was established, due to the potential future threats the industry faced from government regulation and taxation. And then along came COVID and the unconstitutional nicotine ban. Quite a few vape shops went out of business, including one of the original vape shop chains, coincidentally by the name of Vape Shop, with 11 retail locations. 3 scenarios played out during the nicotine ban. Some vape retailers complied and did not operate, but this was limited to very few. Others, like Vaperite, this is what we did, with an online presence, sold e-liquid containing trace amounts of CBD, as well as hardware to enable the use of the CBD e-liquid. This was legal, as CBD was not banned and falls under a medicinal category. Then there were many who simply sold all their existing stock of e-liquid containing nicotine to anybody who knew about the availability and who could pay in cash. And some retailers blatantly made nicotine e-liquid available on their websites for order and delivery. These 3 scenarios refer to the legal retail market. Legal meaning that they were selling high-quality hardware and e-liquid and had been legally compliant prior to the ban. As for the black market, which was already in existence and thriving, there is no way to quantify how much of their mainly counterfeit and low-quality hardware and e-liquid they were able to supply during this period. Then post-COVID. The landscape for the industry changed considerably post-COVID. The number of people vaping increased exponentially. And this could potentially have been due to many smokers only having access to vape products during the nicotine ban, as well as due to the effect that COVID had on people's mindset about their personal health. I think COVID really changed the mindsets of a lot of people. When we started seeing people dying who weren't dying from old age, who were just dying from something that popped up, health suddenly became a major priority in people's lives. Because vaping is correctly perceived as being far less harmful than smoking combustible cigarettes, many smokers made the switch to vaping. And then just when the industry started stabilizing and was able to consolidate product ranges and offerings, along came the disposable vape. These products initially appeared as single-use devices where the battery was not rechargeable and should essentially carry enough charge to last long enough to use all of the e-liquid in the device, and then the battery charge runs out and you throw it away. This is where I believe we lost control of the ability to control underage vaping. It must be noted that there is no legal age limit for vaping in South Africa. And I need to say that again, there is no legal age limit currently for vaping in South Africa, because vaping is not regulated at this stage. However, all VPASA members, made up of a limited number of retailers and wholesalers and manufacturers, we subscribe to a code that they will not sell or market vape products to anyone under 18 years of age. If you visit any reputable vape store, specifically those who are members of VPASA, you will find posters and notices proudly stating that sales to under 18s are not allowed. Age verification is enforced. Unfortunately, the disposable vape has proliferated as a vape of choice for FMCG retailers and petrol stations. There is literally no age verification at the thousands of these retailers who sell these products. And for any person under 18 who wants to vape, they can get a disposable vape quite easily. They are easy to use and easy to hide. They are also extremely expensive compared to traditional vaping devices and e-liquid. Most worryingly, many companies who were never vape retailers but had good connections to FMCG have entered the market and only supply 50 milligram disposable products. Now, 50 milligrams is 5% nicotine. You either hear about 5% or you hear about 50 milligrams, 2%, 20 milligrams. This level of nicotine, and I'm talking about 50 milligrams, is very addictive, extremely addictive, and extremely harsh. Most adult vapors would only use a maximum of 25 milligram nicotine strength, or 2.5%, and many far lower. But for the youth, they will buy what they can, where they can, and from wherever will sell to them. Then in June 2023, the Minister of Finance introduced an excise tax on e-liquid. Despite so-called industry consultation, the Department of Finance did not take any of the arguments and concerns of the industry into account and simply bulldozed through what they had originally proposed. I honestly believe we wasted our time during the consultations. They weren't there to listen to us, they were just there to tick boxes. The tax rate punishes users of low-strength nicotine and encourages users to move to higher-strength nicotine, increasing their addiction. I mean, if you like alcohol and you had a bottle of beer, a 300 ml bottle of beer that was being taxed at the same rate as 80% Stroh rum, would you buy the Stroh rum and consume it in small amounts, or would you buy the beer, the 300 ml beer, which is the same price? You're going to buy the one with the higher levels of alcohol. Additionally, in this country, cigarettes are now ridiculously cheap compared to vaping. And I'm talking about the legal cigarettes. We're not even talking about the illicit trade. And the poorest segment of the population are now discriminated against, as they can't afford to use vaping as a harm-reduced form of feeding their nicotine habit, or as a cessation aid. The black market is booming. Besides reputable retailers, one can go to any store, any China mall, and find e-liquid still being sold at pre-excise tax prices. Black market manufacturing is in full swing. And when I say any store, I'm not talking about the reputable vape stores. I'm talking about, you can go to, if they still call them cafes, I don't know what they call them anymore, all over the place. To give an example of how the black market works, this was a personal experience. I was made aware that a retailer in Jeffreys Bay was selling e-liquid with the same branding as one of our brands, but with a slight twist on the name. Because I live in St. Francis Bay, I work out of Joburg, but I live in St. Francis Bay. One time over, I visited this vape shop. I saw the e-liquid and asked the salesperson what brand it was. He said, no, it's their brand, it's our brand. I said, okay. So I asked him, where do they get it from? No, they have someone who makes it for them in a garage. You know, that's how easy it is to make e-liquid. It's not a complicated product to make. And that's what's happening. Then there are importers who declare incorrect import codes for disposables and avoid paying the excise tax until they get caught one day, if they ever get caught. So who suffers? The few industry players who comply with all the laws and also take the issue of not supplying under 18s very seriously. And then my next paragraph, or to end, I call it the final straw. The one that may break the industry's back. Pending government regulation could be the death of the legal industry. As has been seen with cigarettes, there is no shortage of illicit trade. Law-abiding, tax-compliant companies suffer from regulations and taxation, while criminals prosper due to ineffective and corrupt law enforcement in this country. D-Day for the industry, at this stage we believe, is August 2025. This is when the government has indicated that they would like to have the new tobacco bill signed into law. So in conclusion, back to my topic, and what is the future of the vaping industry in South Africa? My response is that I honestly have no idea. We will simply have to deal with everything the government throws at us and find ways to adapt and improvise. But at some point, if the regulatory and financial burden becomes too much, all that will be left is the black market. Vape retailers, manufacturers, and wholesalers simply do not have the margins to survive this onslaught if it gets any worse. We can only hope that sanity and common sense will prevail, and that the government can be persuaded that although vaping is not harmless, it is by far a less harmful option for smokers who want to quit smoking. Thank you.